Well, good morning. Definitely is morning still here in the Scottish borders. A bit damp and miserable, but never mind. We'll go through some of the latest, if you like, chat and gossip and stuff. One or two funny things I've come across, one or two very serious things that I wanted to look at. Obviously, over the weekend, the foul play team explained, I thought in great detail, what was happening with the Brendan Dassey phone calls. And whilst I'm one of those that are of the opinion that if the information was received through a Freedom of Information Act, then of course anybody can get access to the stuff. Let's let foul play have a listen to them, divvy it out between themselves, and let's see what they make of the stuff that they find on the phone calls. As I say, there won't be anything incriminating of Steve and Brendan, but it might just be that there is stuff that's private between Brendan and Bob and Scott and maybe the rest of the family. So yeah, well, I mean, we'll just, hi there, Jane. We'll just let them do their stuff. If they find anything of interest, then I'm sure they'll get straight in touch with Kathleen Zellner or Steve Drisden and Laura. In no particular order, the Ruby Slippers video, many thanks to David Moore, who informed me that apparently there are other films that have that similar touch to it, whereby you can click on something and something weird happens or whatever. I did do a little bit of research with regards to the Wizard of Oz. It was something that they did on the internet with the Ruby Slippers, purely to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the release of the Wizard of Oz, which apparently came out in 1939. So it was an 80th birthday present to all fans of Wizard of Oz, which is often quoted as being one of the most iconic films of all time. So fair enough. 80th anniversary. They did the Ruby Slippers. I haven't managed. Hello there, Rebecca. I haven't managed to find any other films. Nothing on Snatch or The Big Lebowski. So that's. I'll have to look a little bit further. You know. So as I say, thanks for David Moore to alerting me to that. I have been really busy reading through this book, which is absolutely brilliant. The Cadaver King and the Country Dentist, looking at the careers of Stephen Hayne and Dr. Michael West, and it's by Radley Belko and Tucker Carrington. As you can see, I'm a fair bit way through now, about a third of the way through it, and it's been absolutely brilliant. Possibly, dare I say it, might sound sacrilegious, possibly the best book on criminal injustice that I've read. I suppose because the book's on making a murderer, most of us already know what's in most of it. So yeah, very interesting. It particularly deals with the first two parts of the Innocence Files case, Lavon Brooks and Kennedy Brewer. So that's that book. Thank you to DB Cooper for alerting me to the fact that it's available on Amazon. You can download it at the moment onto your Kindle or whatever. You can download an iVersion, an e-version of it, if you like, for as little as, I believe, £2. I paid the extra to get the book sent in paperback form, but well worth the read. Looking forward, looking ahead. Hopefully, at some point, maybe I can even arranged to have a chat with Radley and Tucker about the book. Okay. I came across a tweet by Hannah Riley. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, must make sure that we are screen sharing. If I do that and do that, and I will just check that I'm able to screen share for you. Yep, that looks good. So if I click on that, hopefully that will, yep, that seems to come up. Okay, so what we've got here, Hannah Riley on this one. Welcome home, Mr. Gates. I am sorry for what this state did to you, and I am in awe of your resilience. Obviously, I Am Resilience was of particular interest to us. As it says here today, Southern Center and the Georgia Innocence Project's client, Johnny Gates, walked out of the Muskogee County Jail a free man. He was incarcerated for an unimaginable and unimaginable 43 years, 26 of them spent on death row for a crime he did not commit. In his words, I fought for 43 years for this day. Mr. Gates never received a fair trial. His initial death sentence was handed down by an all-white jury. Well, whether that's problematic, I suppose back then it might have been. The prosecution engaged in systematic exclusion of POC during jury selection. Their own racist notes labeled prospective white jurors with a W and black jurors with an N. Well, I would say that is pretty damning. The state claimed that they had thrown out all the physical evidence from the case, but in 2015, interns with the Georgia Innocence Project discovered 2 items of evidence in the basement of the DA's office. DNA testing revealed that Mr. Gates was not the perpetrator. So, Atlanta News Now. Here is a picture of that document that they were using with the W and N, male, female, and making notes about the various people. Georgia man freed after 43 years for crime he denies committed. Okay, so here is the article. After 43 years in prison, more than 25 years of that on death row, Johnny Lee Gates walked out of custody on Friday a free man. Gates was convicted during a 1977 trial of the rape, armed robbery, and murder of a 19-year-old German immigrant who'd moved to Columbus 12 days earlier to be with her husband, a soldier at Fort Benning. But Gates's lawyers later showed that prosecutors used blatant race discrimination during jury selection and persuaded the Georgia Supreme Court to grant Gates a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. I fought for 43 years for this day, Gates said. I always had faith it would come, even when others weren't sure. I am an innocent man. I did not commit this crime. What happened to me is something that should never happen to any person. But I am not bitter. I thank God that I am here, and I'm happy to be free. And there is Johnny Lee Gates. On Friday, Gates entered what's called an Alford plea. Well, we've heard plenty about that, haven't we? to voluntary manslaughter and armed robbery, a plea in which Gates did not admit to committing the crimes, but conceded prosecutors might have had enough evidence to convict him. Gates was sentenced to 40 years for the two crimes, but since he had already spent all that time, plus an additional 3 years behind bars, he received credit for time served. Gates confessed to police he'd committed the crimes, but his lawyers contended that he had been coerced. At trial, prosecutors said Gates tightly bound murder victim Catherine Wright with a necktie and a belt from a bathroom before killing her. In 2015, representatives from the Georgia Innocence Project found those two pieces of evidence in the Muskogee County District Attorney's Office, and Senior Judge John Allen allowed the items to be tested for DNA. A series of tests found the presence of DNA from as many as 5 individuals on the tie and belt, but not from Gates. This led Allen to grant Gates a new trial, a decision that was later upheld by the Georgia Supreme Court. In its ruling on March 13, the state court said the newly discovered DNA evidence now available to Gates casts significant doubt on the state's theory that Gates was the perpetrator. In his new trial order, Allen also condemned prosecutors' strikes for prospective black jurors during jury selection, finding undeniable and overwhelming evidence of race discrimination. Gates' new legal team from the Georgia Innocence Project and the Southern Center for Human Rights found that Columbus prosecutors systematically excluded prospective black jurors in 7 death penalty cases, including Gates in the 1970s. In handwritten notes, Columbus prosecutors described prospective black jurors as slow, ignorant, con artist, and fat. They also jotted a B or an N next to black people's names on jury lists and routinely ranked them as the least desirable jurors. Gates was initially sentenced to death during his 3-day trial in 1977. He was resentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in 2003. I can only imagine that he was keen to take the Alford plea because it meant he was immediately released rather than having to go through any more trial. What I did find interesting, and hopefully I can find this, was that there was somebody that actually questioned so congratulations to Hannah Riley, who I presume is a journalist that's been covering this particular case and has obviously got a very strong emotional attachment to Johnny Lee. They've been raising money to help him, so worth checking out that. I can't find it. There was one tweet where somebody had asked, why is he not getting fully compensated? Well, if you take the Alford plea, you will not be getting any compensation. Moving on to another interesting item. Something that has always puzzled me was actually discussed on Twitter by none other than AC, as in AC Rookie, the guy that got to meet Ken Rapist Kratz, and responded to by none other than Jerome Buting. So let me see if I can find the necessary Jerry Buting. AC on Twitter. There we go. Let's start with AC. And I do agree with this. I think this is a very important question. And finally, it's like an epiphany. I have finally discovered what the answer is. Which leads me to one other conclusion, which I would like your opinions on, please. One question I've always had for Steve Drizzen or Laura Nyrider in their vehement defense of Brendan Dassey is, have you ever gone through the actual evidence from that day, the actual physical evidence that was fabricated to point to Stephen Avery? It seems that day is one. Let's come on down. Entirely false on the narrative alone. Brendan was not over at Avery's until after 6 and was home well before 9. I know BD's case has no physical evidence linking him to the crime, but it should still matter to show crime didn't happen at Avery's. Fire pit alone proves falsehood. If it shows Brendan's confessions were a stitch-up of multiple days and events, why can't that be enough to show even further his confession was false? With that said, I appreciate all you do for Brendan and other wrongfully convicted youths across America. I hope you continue to fight for him and explore all avenues possible. And then one or two other people have chimed in. I don't want to sound as if I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I've been asking this question for nearly 2 years now. Ever since Making a Murderer Series 2 came out, and Kathleen Zellner definitely seemed critical of particularly Laura's performance in front of the en banc judges. Why she didn't defend fully, not just Brendan, but also Stephen Avery. I too often wondered if Laura Nyrider and Steve Drizzen are as familiar with Stephen Avery's case as they were about Brendan Dassey's. In my opinion, to be an effective advocate for either one, you need to know everything about both cases and all evidence. Brendan Dassey was used to convict Stephen Avery. He was his alibi, and he was the key to the evidence that was discovered. So I thought that was a very interesting question. As I say, there's that question that was posed by AC Rookie. So Jerry Buting. Unfortunately, Brendan's trial lawyers chose not to challenge the state's claim that Stephen Avery committed the crime. They could have essentially retried Stephen Avery's trial within Brendan Dassey's trial, including Kratz's claim during Stephen Avery's trial that only one man was responsible. They did not do so. The real caper by? I've always wondered about that. I agree with you 100%. Jerry, please, Laura. Laura's blue. I don't know if that's Laura as in Laura perplexed. Anyway, if it is, then hi, Laura. If it's not, then hi to the other Laura. Jerry, please clarify. By trial lawyers, you mean Fremgen and Edelstein, because the question is about the appeals of Drizzen and Nyrider. They could essentially retry Stephen Avery case in the appeal process. This doesn't seem right. And Jerry replied categorically, it's the trial lawyers, not post-conviction lawyers. Drizzen and Nyrider were stuck with the strategy employed by the trial lawyers. And I can't help thinking that that's obviously a case of procedural bar. So let's come back to what I really wanted to talk about. Let's come back here. It's always concerned me why Stephen Avery and Steve and Laura tended to, particularly, for example, in Australia, they hardly ever talked about Stephen Avery, that I think they mentioned in Sydney. They didn't mention Stephen Avery once. They mentioned Kathleen Zellner once, and that was actually David Rudolph in a little quip about the fact that the guys from the Northwestern school where Steve and Laura are from, they've had more exonerations than Kathleen Zellner, and that was a little quip by David Rudolph, and it made you wonder why aren't Steve and Laura really attacking the state's case against Stephen Avery? And now we've got the answer. I've got the answer, and other people have got the answer. It's because of this procedural bar whereby they can only talk about Brendan. They cannot go over. In effect, they cannot refute that Stephen Avery was found guilty. I think is basically what's happening there. There's a procedural bar to being able to say, well, we don't even think that Stephen Avery is guilty, because that was never contested in the original trial. But my question to you would be then, looking forward, if Brendan Dassey, to me now, seems so inextricably, is that the word? Inextricably linked to Stephen Avery, in the fact that until Stephen Avery is proven innocent, then Stephen and Laura cannot look at Stephen Avery's case and really talk about it and go against the fact that he was convicted. That's what I'm getting the sense of, that they really cannot do anything with Brendan Dassey until Stephen Avery is finally exonerated. And you can see how, with this inextricable link between Brendan and Stephen, as I say, Brendan is snookered at the moment until Stephen Avery is proved innocent and released. And I can see how from a political point of view, I don't think there's anything that's going to happen with any clemency bid for Brendan until Steve is released, because of this such a strong link, because of this procedural bar that was created when Fremgen and Edelstein, obviously, look, they've got limited budgets, limited time. Did they put on the best they could do? I think I'm pretty sure they did. They're not Jerry Buting and Dean Strang, and they're not being paid the hundreds of thousands of dollars to be Jerry Buting and Dean Strang. And of course, we heard from Rob Bellin that in the world of attorneys, they don't come much bigger than Strang and Buting. Even before the Avery trial, they were considered star lawyers. But as I say, I can't see how the governor is ever going to entertain any clemency deal, any idea of clemency, until Stephen Avery is out. Because once Stephen Avery is out, then Stephen Drizzen and Laura Nyrader can go on the attack against the finding guilty of Brendan, which up until now, clearly, they have not been able to do. Anyway, that's my sort of estimation of what's going on. Let me know how you feel about it, whether you agree. So, just to sum up, as I say, brilliant book. Check it out. You can get it on Amazon as an Audible book for as little as £2 or for £14, I think it was. Hannah Riley on Twitter, if you want to check out her. I might even pop the link in. She's trying to raise funds for Johnny Lee Gates, who had to take an Alford plea, 64 years old, spent 43 years in prison. I can appreciate why he would take an Alford plea, for the same reason that Mike Peterson did. It's a way of getting out of jail straight away. He's already served more than what he was sentenced for in this in the Alford plea. By taking the Alford plea, he was sentenced to 40 years for manslaughter, for something he clearly didn't do. But does he want to sit in jail for another 4 or 5 years, waiting for a trial to go through the evidence and stuff and the appeal stages and all that kind of stuff? So I suppose I can understand if that's the reason why he took the Alford plea. But very much so, Hannah says about the fact that she is in awe of his resilience, which of course reminds us of Ricky Kidd, who is hopefully going from strength to strength. So yeah, many thanks to AC Rookie for A, for asking the question, and B, for Jerry for actually explaining the intricacies of the case. And as I say, I've always felt that it's going to need Steve to be exonerated for them to let go of Brendan. I can't see any way that they're going to let Brendan go when in his original case, in his original trial, his defense lawyers didn't even dispute, obviously, the fact that there was such inconsistency with Steve's trial and conviction. And that famous quote about one man and one man alone. If that was never even raised in the original trial, then sadly, I know it seems a bit bizarre, but I suspect that that's the reason why they are procedurally barred from looking at that. And in that case, then I would say, fair play to Steve Drizzen and Laura Nyrider for putting on the show that you have done so far, and the efforts that you've put to try and help Brendan. I got a video sent to me by my wife's cousin in Australia. And let's see if I can find it. I've got so many messages flashing up from Jerome. He's desperate to get hold of me, but here we go. Hopefully you can all see this. You can certainly see on the top there all the flashing messages. Hi, Jerome. I look forward to having a chat with you tomorrow, looking at the rest of the trial by media cases. We're hoping, the dude and I, to get hold of Rob Bellin sometime soon, possibly over the weekend. I've also been contacted by Fleetside with regard to his latest offering, looking at some thorny issues such as 2 RAV4s and Teresa Alive and all that kind of stuff. So look forward to that. As I say, I was sent this by my wife's cousin in Australia. And I'm just gonna let it play. I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely loved this. And hopefully it'll work okay for us. Let's click on play. So I'll finish off with this.
There was a group of adults who were taking a computer science course at a community college, and after a few weeks of classes, the professor decided to have some fun one day as a little learning activity, and he divided them by sex, and he put the men on one side of the room, women on the other side of the room, and said, I want you all to do a project for the next 10 minutes, and I want you to determine what gender computers ought to be. And so they deliberated, and so finally, here come the men. They have voted. They voted unanimously that computers should be referred to in the feminine gender. And so the professor said, all right, share with me your points. They had 4 points. They said, the reason why computers should be spoken of in the feminine gender is because no one but their creator understands their internal logic. The second reason is because when computers communicate with each other, they speak in code language that only they and experts can understand. The third reason is because every mistake you make is stored on their hard drive for later retrieval. The fourth reason, these men said, because as soon as you commit to one, you find yourself spending half your paycheck on accessorizing it. Now, but don't laugh too hard, because the women have the last word on this subject. The women voted unanimously. Computers must be in the masculine gender. Why? As they gave their report, they said, first of all, in order to get their attention, you have to turn them on. Secondly, they have a lot of data but still can't think for themselves. Thirdly, they're supposed to help you solve problems, but half the time they are the problem. And the final reason they gave was because as soon as you commit to one, you realize that if you waited a little longer, you could have gotten a better model.
Yes, Jerome, I knew there was an echo. That was me testing to see
if everything
worked.
There was a group of adults who were taking a computer science course at a community college.
And after a few weeks of classes, the professor decided to have some fun one day as a little learning activity, and he divided them by sex, and he put...
Okay. So, hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of fun at the end there. I certainly enjoyed that myself. Okay. And I suppose there's an element of truth in both sides of the argument, on both sides of the pancake. Anyway, Jerome, yes, we'll catch you up with you tomorrow. I say, unfortunately, I do need to check and make sure sound works on my phone, so that's why I need to be able to hear what's coming through. Hopefully, it didn't spoil it too much, and you got the gist of it anyway. So that's really all I wanted to go through today. Just as I say, I'll put the link. I'll try and put the link A to the book, and B to Hannah Riley on Twitter, who, as I say, is trying to fundraise for Johnny Lee Gates, who she is in awe of his resilience. And as I say, it's quite interesting how the as I say, it always puzzled me as to why the Steve and Laura weren't aggressive towards any notion that Steve was guilty. This seems to be something that they've had their hands tied all this time. For me, that makes the system questionable. Hopefully when everything is resolved in Steve's case, they will look at the how incredibly wrong the system was, whereby everything about Brendan and Steve's case is just so wonky. It beggars belief that that this kind of injustice can be perpetuated. But I say, when you read this book and start reading this book, you realize it's not just in Wisconsin. Anyway, I'm going to say cheerio because I've kept you over half an hour. Thanks for tuning in. As I say, I'll try and pop some links into the description, and I'm sure that there'll be other news bits and clips that will come across over the next week or so. So anyway, and as I say, hopefully we're going to be doing another Fleetside presentation. I'm actually hoping that we're going to do it on the Dude's channel, get the Dude involved, and also Rob Bellin, possibly, hopefully, at the some point over the weekend. And we'll see Jerome very soon. Okay, cheers. Bye for now.